I can't remember exactly what I said about not making the petition for our daily bread too religious. And I'm not quite sure what you mean, nor how ironically, by asking if I've become one of Vidler's young men. About Vidler, I never heard the program which created all that scandal. And naturally, one wouldn't condemn a dog on newspaper extracts. But I have now read his essay in Soundings, and I believe I go a good deal further with him than you would. Much of what he quotes from F.D. Maurice and Bonhoeffer seems to me very good, and so, I think, are his own arguments for the establishment. At any rate, I can well understand how a man who is trying to love God and his neighbor should come to dislike the very word religion, a word, by the way, which hardly ever appears in the New Testament. Newman makes my blood run cold when he says in one of the parochial and plain sermons that heaven is like a church, because in both, one single sovereign subject, religion, is brought before us. He forgets that there is no temple in the New Jerusalem. He has substituted religion for God, as if navigation were substituted for arrival, or battle for victory, or wooing for marriage, or in general the means for the end. But even in this present life, there is danger in the very concept of religion. It carries the suggestion that this is one more department of life, an extra department added to the economic, the social, the intellectual, the recreational, and all the rest. But that whose claims are infinite can have no standing as a department. Either it is an illusion, or else our whole life falls under it. We have no non-religious activities, only religious and irreligious. Religion, nevertheless, appears to exist as a department, and in some ages to thrive as such. It thrives partly because there exists in many people a love of religious observances, which I think Simone Weil is quite right in regarding as a merely natural taste. There exists also, Vidler is rather good on this, the delight in religious as in any other organization. Then all sorts of aesthetic, sentimental, historical, political interests are drawn in. Finally, sales of work, the parish magazine, and bell ringing, and Santa Claus. None of them bad things, but none of them is necessarily of more spiritual value than the activities we call secular. And they are infinitely dangerous when this is not understood. This department of life, labeled sacred, can become an end in itself, an idol that hides both God and my neighbors. When the means are autonomous, they are deadly. It may even come about that a man's most genuinely Christian actions fall entirely outside that part of his life, which he calls religious. I read in a religious paper, nothing is more important than to teach children to use the sign of the cross. Nothing? Not compassion, nor veracity, nor justice, voilà l'ennemi. One must, however, walk warily, for the truth that religion as a department has really no right to exist can be misunderstood. Some will conclude that this illegitimate department ought to be abolished. Others will think, coming nearer to the truth, that it ought to cease to be departmental by being extended to the whole of life, but will misinterpret this. They will think it means that more and more of our secular transactions should be opened with prayer, that a wearisomely explicit pietism should infest our talk, that there should be no more cakes and ale. A third sort, well aware that God still rules a very small part of their lives, and that a departmental religion is no good, may despair. It would have to be carefully explained to them that to be still only a part is not the same as being a permanent department. In all of us, God still holds only a part. D-Day is only a week ago. The bite so far taken out of Normandy shows small on the map of Europe. The resistance is strong, the casualties heavy, and the event uncertain. There is, we have to admit, a line of demarcation between God's part in us and the enemy's region. But it is, we hope, a fighting line, not a frontier fixed by agreement. But I suspect the real misunderstanding of Vidler's talk lay elsewhere. We have been speaking of religion as a pattern of behavior, which, if contentedly departmental, cannot really be Christian behavior. But people also, and more often, use religion to mean a system of beliefs. When they heard that Vidler wanted a church with less religion, they thought he meant that the very little, which liberal theology has still left of the faith once given, was to be emptied out. Hence someone asked, is he a theist? Well, he certainly is. I think he wants very earnestly to retain some Christian doctrines, but he is prepared to scrap a good deal. Traditional doctrines are to be tested. Many things will have to be outgrown or survive chiefly as venerable archaisms or as fairy stories. He feels quite happy about this undefined program of jettison because he trusts in the continued guidance of the Holy Spirit. A noble faith, provided, of course, there is any such being as the Holy Spirit. But I suppose his existence is itself one of the traditional doctrines, which, on Vidler's premises, we might any day find we had outgrown. So with the doctrine, Vidler calls it the fact, that man is a twofold creature, not only a political creature, but also a spiritual being. Vidler and you and I, and Plato, think it a fact. Tens of thousands, perhaps millions, think it a fantasy. The neutral description of it is a traditional doctrine. Do you think he means that these two doctrines, and why just these two, are the hard core of his belief, exempt from the threat of rejection, which overhangs all other doctrines? Or would he say that, as the title of the book implies, he is only taking soundings, and if the line is not long enough to reach bottom, soundings can yield only negative information to the navigator? I was interested in the things you said about forgive us our trespasses. Often, to be sure, there is something definite for which to ask forgiveness. This is plain sailing. But like you, I often find one or other of two less manageable states, either a vague feeling of guilt or a sly and equally vague self-approval. What are we to do with these? Many modern psychologists tell us always to distrust this vague feeling of guilt as something purely pathological. And if they had stopped at that, I might believe them. But when they go on, as some do, to apply the same treatment to all guilt feelings whatever, to suggest that one's feeling about a particular unkind act or a particular insincerity is also an equally untrustworthy, I can't help thinking they are talking nonsense. One sees this the moment one looks at other people. I have talked to some who felt guilt when they jolly well ought to have felt it. They have behaved like brutes and know it. I've also met others who felt guilty and weren't guilty by any standard I can apply. And thirdly, I've met people who were guilty and didn't seem to feel guilt. And isn't this what we should expect? People can be malades imaginaires who are well and think they are ill, and others, especially consumptives, are ill and think they are well. And thirdly, far the largest class, people are ill and know they are ill. It would be very odd if there were any region in which all mistakes were in one direction. Some Christians would tell us to go on rummaging and scratching till we find something specific. We may be sure, they say, that there are real sins enough to justify the guilt feeling or to overthrow the feeling that all is well. I think they are right in saying that if we hunt long enough, we shall find or think we have found something. But that is just what wakens suspicion. A theory which could never by any experience be falsified can for that reason hardly be verified. And just as when we are yielding to temptation, we make ourselves believe that what we have always thought a sin will on this occasion, for some strange reason, not be a sin, shan't we persuade ourselves that something we have always rightly thought to be innocent was really wrong? We may create scruples, and scruples are always a bad thing, if only because they usually distract us from real duties. I don't at all know whether I'm right or not, but I have, on the whole, come to the conclusion that one can't directly do anything about either feeling. One is not to believe either. Indeed, how can one believe a fog? I come back to St. John. If our heart condemn us, God is greater than our heart. And equally, if our heart flatter us, God is greater than our heart. I sometimes pray, not for self-knowledge in general, but for just so much self-knowledge at the moment, as I can bear and use at the moment, the little daily dose. Have we any reason to suppose that total self-knowledge, if it were given us, would be for our good? Children and fools, we are told, should never look at half-done work, and we are not yet, I trust, even half done. You and I wouldn't, at all stages, think it wise to tell a pupil exactly what we thought of his quality. It is much more important that he should know what to do next. If one said this in public, one would have all the Freudians on one's back. And mind you, we are greatly indebted to them. They did expose the cowardly evasions of really useful self-knowledge, which we had all been practicing from the beginning of the world. But there is also a merely morbid and fidgety curiosity about one's self, the slop-over from modern psychology, which surely does no good. The unfinished picture would so like to jump off the easel and have a look at itself. An analysis doesn't cure that. We all know people who have undergone it and seem to have made themselves a lifelong subject of research ever since. If I am right, the conclusion is that when our conscience won't come down to brass tacks, but will only vaguely accuse or vaguely approve, we must say to it, like Herbert, peace prattler, and get on.